How's it going, everybody? LunarLemon here with part 5 out of 6 of my GD level commentary series. Crazy to think that we're already at the penultimate part, and this part's probably also going to be the strangest one. There's a bit of a time jump in here, if you know what I mean. It will make more sense as we go on, but we will start out at the end of 2018, and this will end at the end of 2024. I'll be sure to explain the context as we go, so just bear with me, and I hope you enjoy. The first level we'll be talking about is Tart Nostalgia. As I implied last part, this was not really a planned installment for the Nostalgia series. This did end up being the last one that I released, though. Now, later on, I did have another Nostalgia series. I will explain more about that later. Anyway, this level, it's not very memorable per se, and if I remember correctly, it was released at a bit of a weird time. I distinctly remember working on this level quite a bit on my phone, on the bus on the way home from school. I had just started 9th grade at the time, so I had just entered high school. This is the shortest level in this series. It often feels like it ends before it really starts, and I do kind of wish it was a bit longer, but I can see why I ended it where I did. However, despite it being the shortest in the series, it's actually not that much shorter than Sour Nostalgia, and looking back, I actually kind of like some of the gameplay in this level. I think a great example of gameplay ideas that I liked is the block at the top at 14%, how that remains completely still while you still have to navigate through the other blocks, and sadly only one of the other blocks moves, and in my head the idea was for more of them to do so, but I can't remember if I got lazy or if I just didn't really know what exactly to do for that. Now, even though I do like a lot of the gameplay ideas I had in this level, I do agree that it is way too orb heavy, especially once you get to the drop. Also, looking back, I'm surprised I did that with a black orb at 35%, but the orbs start to become a bigger problem once you get to 40%. This part is almost nothing but orbs. But then when you get to 47, you get to one of my favorite duels that I have ever made. You would think a UFO and spider duel sounds absolutely atrocious, but I think the way I did it I don't know, it's just really fun. I don't know if it's hard to learn or anything, but I think really the only thing you really need to know is you have to click twice before the UFO has to do anything. Which, it would bring you back to where you start with the spider, but, it lines things up for you. After that, it does transition into a symmetrical ship duel, which is a bit janky sometimes. I'm willing to bet that's part of 2.2's physics changes. I know a lot of upside-down ship gameplay from older levels has been broken due to one of the smaller updates. I haven't noticed it a whole lot, but I know a lot of people have. But this is one of the examples where I've noticed it. Also, when recording the footage for the compilation video, I kept getting confused on how to do the maze part at 72. That's just a really strange maze, especially if you don't really know how to do it. But then after that point, you start to see a lot of trollish gameplay that I really don't like. At 76%, you see an arrow and a fake block move. They move in harmony, but they move terribly. Why do they move there and then? That's just evil design. It's I don't know, I don't think I understood the importance of sight reading at the time. Generally, the last 20 or so percent is just really janky and awkward. If you don't really know what you're doing, then you're probably not going to have a good time learning at all. Also, this is, I believe, the only one of these levels that has a jump, right at the end. You can die at that last jump and die at 99. Usually in the other levels, the last jump is, quite a bit away from the end. And, of course, there's no right or wrong way to do that. It's not necessarily breaking the formula, if you will. But other than all that, that's basically all there is to say about Tart Nostalgia. It's a shockingly solid level, but understandably unmemorable. The next level we will be talking about is Risers 4. At the time, I believed this level to be my best work, and whether or not you agree with that statement, there is an undeniable fact about this, that it was definitely one of my most polarizing levels in terms of how it was received. As a result, it was the last level that I released on my old account, either later in late 2018 or sometime in 2019. At the beginning, I did switch accounts in game, and that's the account I'm using to this day. Now, why I did this, it's kind of a long story, and I'm not really going to get into it. But this level, it's very different from the rest of the series. Difficulty-wise, it's a step down, being about 9-star difficulty, and even stylistically, it's super bright. There's a ton of glow and vibrant colors, especially at the beginning. One of the biggest criticisms with the level is that the more you go on, the more the quality falls. The first part's not bad, the yellow part that's at the drop doesn't seem to be too bad. Then you get to 60%, and things are clearly much lazier. Gameplay-wise, I'm really not sure how to feel about this level. I do think that there were some good concepts that I had, but they were not executed properly. For example, the green orbs at 8%, you're not supposed to click them, but there's not much of an indication that you're not supposed to. You're supposed to fall down to the block below, because that's where the speed portal is, and otherwise you're stopped by an impossible jump. And I've noticed that this is where a lot of people stop playing the level. I remember going into level request streams, and people were playing the level, and that's where they got confused. I remember one time, even the creator Jerkrat, who was a mod at the time, he was streaming a level request stream, and I requested the level, and he played it. And I could be making this part up, but I do believe he said something along the lines of it being one of the worst levels he has ever played, which, was really fucking harsh, to say the least. He was definitely exaggerating, I have no doubt about that, but that still really hurt. And that's just not something you say as one of the game moderators. That's just, you don't say that. But considering the fact that he didn't even make it far into the level, yeah, there's no way he wasn't exaggerating. Also, this level has a whopping 1,405 move triggers. I don't know why that's in my notes, I'm gonna be completely honest. I know that there are a lot of groups. I believe that the only reason there's so many groups is because of the dash orb part that's at 38%. And I remember spending a while working on just copy and pasting all the move triggers for that. But yeah, looking back, this hardly even feels like a level in the Risers series. All the other levels in the series have a certain aesthetic to them that I can't really describe, but this doesn't really match the description. I think I was just trying to be a lot more experimental, but this wasn't really the place to do it. However, the ending of the level was definitely lazy and rushed. If I remember correctly, I was streaming working on the level, and I was getting, excited with the progress I was making and decided, oh, maybe I'm done now. But I probably should have put more thought into it. But no, I guess I was just too excited to get the level out, and yeah, I probably should have sat on it a bit more. Even the gameplay of the last 20% is really weird, because it has a lot of orbs, but you don't click most of them, and the ones you do or don't click have no indication over which is which. This is especially a problem once you get to 88%, because there's red pads and black orbs, and you don't really get much time to react to them in the first place. But even still, there's no indicator for anything. And, it's kind of just a stupid decision. Strangely enough, this level really doesn't have all too much to say about it. The polarizing reception kind of killed my motivation to create, and this level was released a month before the new year, going into 2019. And I mention that because 2019 and 2020 is definitely the era of my love-hate relationship with the game. It is also when I had a lot of drama with my friends at the time. It was around October of 2018 when I started to resent the idea of having online friendships. And there was some drama that involved a couple specific people that did sort of awaken this. But all the things I was doing and saying and whatnot were just completely blown out of proportion. And I mean, it was entirely my fault. I'm fully aware of that, and I'm not the person I used to be. It's been like 8 years since this, and I am happy to say that the vast majority of people who were affected by this I am friends with again, and I have been for years. But even aside from that, starting in 2019, I began to have this love-hate relationship with the game. I would quit for like a few weeks, and then I would go back, and it was very on and off until like summer of 2019. I was mostly, off after that point, but I did still play the game every now and then. And it really wasn't until 2.2 came out at the end of 2023 when, I actually was actively playing the game again. But regardless, this level was sort of the end of an era, because after this, quality fell at least until 2.2. The next level we will be talking about is Sky Castle. This was the first level to be released on my current account, and it's one of my most forgettable levels, and generally it's not very good. Now, this was made during that time period where I didn't really have any online friends, as like an intentional choice I kind of mentioned a couple minutes ago. And so this was a collab with two of my friends that I know in person. Stardust and Jagfox still played the game at least a little bit at the time, and so I figured, why don't the three of us do a collab? And, collab it is. The first part of the level was made by me. It's really bland and lazy, and generally just doesn't have anything interesting. But then when you get to the wave part, that's when Stardust's part begins. And honestly, despite them not being a great creator, there are some interesting ideas that appear in this part. But I'm not talking about the block design because I have no idea what is going on. I also noticed that some of the, outlines are, either wrong or just missing. It's just complicated to even look at, so how do you expect me to describe this? Anyway, I like the floating, glowing circle things. One of them is, clearly just supposed to be the sun, but then the other two are, bluish, whitish, on a black background, and I think those are pretty neat. It feels, atmospherically appropriate. But also, the yellow one at 31, I don't remember ever fixing this, but I remember it used to be broken. And I mean broken as in visually. One of the corners would always, flip in front of the clouds. I don't remember fixing this, but clearly I did. The drop of the song is at 37, but Stardust said they didn't know when the drop of the song was, despite it literally being in their part. But that's kind of the whole reason that their part is so long, because they're well, I'm just gonna build till the drop, when they had already done so. They definitely did a better job at sticking to the theme and appropriate difficulty than Jagfox did, though. I don't feel that the part that Jagfox made necessarily has bad gameplay, but it's definitely a lot harder than it was supposed to be. Thematically, it also starts out fine within the regards to the castle part of it, but then it turns into green and yellow for some reason, which doesn't make me think Sky Castle. Then the cloud part afterwards, that I believe was actually made by me, just to have an outro to the level, and then there's a really long, text outro. And yeah, this level's actually really short, and it's about as uninteresting as a level can get. I also have a level in Super Mario Maker 2 with, the same exact name, but that's all there really is to say about this level. It's just not really one that's ever coming up in conversation because there's just not much to say. The next level we'll be talking about is Interstate Nostalgia. Now, this is not part of the other nostalgia levels I had previously mentioned. And it might sound a bit misleading, but since this was on a different account, when I made a new nostalgia series, this was, part of that. This is actually the fourth level in that series, but the first three of those levels were taken down from the servers years ago for some reason. Fortunately, even though the first three aren't up, I do still have backups of two of the levels, and the other one that doesn't have a backup, I know where to find the footage for when it was verified. That series was also supposed to have a fifth installment, which the description of the level does tease, called Nostalgia Turnpike. That was supposed to be the hardest one of that series, but it never ended up getting made. Since, like I said before, starting around 2019 I started playing the game significantly less, this level was released like a whole year after Sky Castle. So this is the only level I released in 2020 that is still up today. You don't count. Anyway, this is actually a collab with Tyson, and he only made a couple of the parts early on, and he wanted to make more, but for some odd reason, I pulled a spooky space on him and just finished the rest of the level myself. To elaborate on what I mean by pulling a spooky space, that's basically what happened when my cousin and I made Spooky Space, except he didn't really have access to the game, so that was different. I believe Tyson said he didn't really mind the fact that I did this, it's just that he was kind of caught by surprise when the level is just suddenly out. But even looking back, I do still find some of the gameplay in this level to be pretty solid, despite the fact that I was probably getting less used to the editor since I was playing the game less. But it's like 9-star Easy Demon difficulty. I also think that the structures in both parts made by me and Tyson were significantly more interesting than what I've done in the past. Gameplay-wise, though, like I already implied, this is just a huge step up. There are some pretty, standard-looking parts for gameplay. Even the first robot part that the level starts out with feels pretty standard, but I think it was executed in a good way. I also remember this level being more orb-heavy than it is, but, that's kind of a good thing that it isn't. But even then, the drop, I do still like the gameplay, but there are some weird, blind jumps and whatnot. At 55, there is a dash orb that you're kind of just supposed to know is there. It's just so sudden. I don't really understand. But once you get to, 65, the structures and whatnot start to appear a bit more lazy, which was definitely, 100% on me. There are still some cool-looking things in, that part of the level onward. Like the mini-cube at 79, I think, is really cool, especially when you hit the orb to become big again, and that one spike moves, and there's that sideways monster thing. I think those look pretty cool. But, 71, that part with the orbs, I don't know, there should be more structures there. It looks so empty, even for a nostalgia level. And then the last cube at 90%, there's just 2 or 3 jumps, but it's so barren. I think I had the right idea when making this level, but I probably just got lazy with it from lack of interest or something. That would sound right, considering the time period and whatnot. But this was my second to last 2.1 level, so the next level we'll be talking about certainly won't look like it, but it was my last 2.1 level. The next level we'll be talking about was my last level in 2.1. This was released in 2021, and it is just called Keeping It Simple. At this point, when I made this level, I had forgotten how to do a lot of stuff in the editor. I was very rarely playing the game, and sometimes I would just play it in small bursts and then just stop again. This was pretty much the case up until the end of 2023. But yeah, this level is, it's pretty simple. This level also uses cycles as the song, so interesting that I decided to go with a main level song, but I think that was a deliberate choice. Something I really like about this level, though, is that I decided to challenge myself and make the gameplay cube-only. And while it does pretty much only use old block design like the nostalgia levels do, For some reason I used a different ground, and I think the gameplay is actually pretty solid, which is pretty surprising considering that I've basically forgotten how to use the editor when I made this level. There's a lot of interesting memory parts, which I've never really been good at making memory parts in levels, so this is definitely interesting. I mean, some of the memory in this level's pretty obvious, but then there's a weird timing at 30%. Then there's some occasional jumps where it's not very obvious if you're supposed to click or not, or just fall. Then there's, orbs in portals at times, which is not something I've done a whole lot, surprisingly, but I've seen it in a lot of demon levels. Basically what I'm saying is, despite how little I remembered from the editor at this time, the gameplay is still pretty solid, even if the level itself is relatively forgettable and just, not particularly too interesting. Again, I like how it's just cube only, but there's not really much else about this level that really stands out. But I think it was just released at a bad time, but otherwise probably wouldn't even exist. It's just a bit of an outlier. It's not even part of the Nostalgia series, despite kind of looking like it. It's also too easy for that anyway, but still. But yeah, this level was made, and then we are now going to jump forward a whopping 32 months. The next level we will be talking about is Grayscale 3. And you would think, since I hadn't used the editor in a long while, the level probably wouldn't look particularly stellar. But that's where you're wrong, because there were many levels that I tried to make at the beginning of 2.2, but a lot of them ended up getting scrapped because just one issue or another. I didn't like the gameplay, I didn't like the effects, I didn't like the deco, and in retrospect, that was a good thing. I messed around with a lot of the new triggers with the camera and gameplay direction stuff and shaders and all sorts of crazy stuff, and refamiliarized myself with what I already knew. Rotate triggers, move triggers, pulse triggers, etc. And as a result, when I finally got around to making a level that I would end up finishing and uploading, we got Grayscale 3, which, honestly, I still really like how this level turned out. It turned out so much better than I could have anticipated. Not to mention, I was frequently asking my friends for ideas and suggestions on, whether it be gameplay or decoration ideas. I think that caused a lot of nice things to come out of the level, basically. Fortunately, one thing that made it super easy to make another grayscale level is that there's just straight up a grayscale trigger now. And while this does affect player color and portals and whatnot, I still thought that was fine. And because you can't see the colors of the portals, a lot of people, would end up getting confused because there's no, clear indicators, but 2.2 did introduce that one setting that kind of puts a symbol that, makes it pretty clear what each portal is. And even if you have that setting off, I did add a thing in the level to where it tells you what each portal is. And also, for some reason, if you delete the grayscale trigger, I made it so that the level is not actually grayscale. As a matter of fact, the background is purple. I don't really know why I did this. I've had a lot of people ask me that, and I really don't know why I did that. But, I mean, you're not supposed to play the level like that anyway, so that's my personal take on it. If you delete the grayscale trigger and then you play the level, you're just doing it wrong. But there were 3 main inspirations that are all mentioned in the end screen of the level. Some of the checkerboard effects were suggested and inspired by my friend Peyton. And then the gameplay of the first spider, as well as the decoration effects in the first robot part, were inspired by Motley Orc's level Span. And then the dual part at 62, there's these blocks that are kind of in front of everything. They're kind of hard to see, but they're there for decoration, and they kind of fade, like some of them are facing left, some are facing right. That was actually inspired by something in High by Kramal. It's pretty subtle, but it was a key inspiration for it. And while this level does have a fair amount of those shader triggers, I don't believe many of the effects and whatnot really require too much of an explanation, at least in that regard. Because even though this level does have that checkerboard background, I decided to get a little more creative with it. Firstly, it is significantly more optimized now, so we don't have like 100,000 objects in this level because that would just be unnecessary. But you'll oftentimes also see those tiles do different things, like sometimes they'll change size or rotate or, I don't know, a variety of things. And I guess I don't fully really know how to explain how these were done, but I do feel like that they're, pretty simple uses of scale triggers and rotate triggers mostly. They're just used in different ways, like sometimes they're made wide or tall, or, rotate at, I don't know. I feel like it's not that complicated. I don't really know how to explain things, but something I almost completely forgot about is that there is hidden text at 86%. If you miss the yellow orb and die at the saw, there is text that appears that just says, "Dude," because there's a time warp trigger right before that, so you're already moving really slowly, and you have to not be paying attention if you're gonna die there. Something else that might be interesting to mention is that at 87%, there is that one part where after 90%, the gameplay goes backwards. The percentage actually used to be bugged there. When you flipped around, the percentage would go down, and then when you teleported, it jumped to like 92 or 93, I think. But then the level would end at like 97%. This is because the level uses an end trigger, but this did end up getting fixed. This was a pretty common problem with a lot of early 2.2 levels. Something that I should mention that persists throughout the last 25% of the level is that in Beat with the Music, there is a random tile that will basically just pulse. And because this uses the advanced random trigger, this is where I learned that the advanced random trigger requires a lot of groups. I needed a group for each tile, and then I needed trigger for that group, but then I needed to put that group in a spawn group, which is a separate group ID, and then the advanced random trigger would pick one of those spawn groups. And I wish I could just have the advanced random trigger do it the other way, but because it's kind of a pulsing process thing, I don't really think it would work that well. But fortunately, 2.2 increased our group limit tenfold, so that makes things nicer. This level doesn't have over 1,000 groups, but it does have like at least 400 or so, if I'm not mistaken. I don't really remember. Other than all of that, I would say Grayscale 3 is actually relatively standard, but I like how it turned out. I really do. The next level we will be talking about is Null. This level was made in about a 3 or so day span, and yet it ended up being one of my most well-received levels. Frankly, it really wasn't supposed to be anything of significance, and that's not to say that I don't like it or I can't see why it's so well-received. I mean, honestly, I kinda can. And it's weird because I had such a different mindset when making this level, and it's so simple yet complicated at the same time, and I just don't really know how to put it into words. I think the best way I put it was that I kinda just made the level. And it's so vague, yet at the same time, I guess it's just me not overthinking it. But usually when that would happen, you would think that I would just end up making the most horrendous dog shit you would ever see, and instead I got the complete opposite, and that was the agreement, if you will. It does have a fair use of shaders, but I think the way I used them was still pretty good, since a lot of levels are criticized heavily for using shaders too much. But even right at the beginning, the first part has a chromatic trigger, but it's pretty subtle. Like, you can notice it, but I think the way I executed it just makes things look pretty good. And I don't know if that's because everything's mini and zoomed in, but that is certainly how I feel. But also, after that first part, at 9%, there is a 1% chance of the fire in the hole sound playing as you, like, switch gravity into the ship part. And I like the faces on the hills that I put. They're all pretty different. A lot of the expressions are kinda indescribable, but I don't know, I like the way they just bob in tune with the music. Those hills, though, are a pretty good example of me using the random trigger. It's in a pretty simple way, though. There's just a 50-50 chance if the hills are going to pulse red or yellow. And that, kind of just repeats with different spawn triggers and whatnot. Also, while recording this part, I just realized there is a random decoration block above the ship part that was presumably left there on accident, but it's like all the default properties. It's one of those brick blocks. It might have been added there from the next part, but again, I definitely didn't leave it there on purpose. I probably would have remembered that or recognized it, but I guess that's not important. But the next part has like a sepia effect to it, which I think is done really neatly. Because even at first, it's not a full sepia effect. And then, like, there's some hue triggers after it becomes fully sepia. Even then, those are pretty subtle. Things slowly fade again to have more color. Then you enter the drop. And then this UFO part / ship part, I don't know why, but it's probably my favorite part of the level. And yeah, it is pretty simple. Like, it just briefly has like that checkerboard, but it also has glow and like that animated liquid stuff. But something that I really like that I did is that, again, in tune with the music, there's like a pulse effect that happens, and these random triggers make it so that everything will just turn into one of 4 colors. And I think that gives this part a lot of personality, if you will. Because sometimes it's pink, sometimes it's green, sometimes it's something else, sometimes it keeps being the same. Ultimately, the gameplay at this part all stays the same, but despite the decoration and gameplay being the same, the colors just make it feel different. Then there's like this wave part, which I've always wanted to make a wave part like this, where there's just D blocks on the ceiling and floor, and it almost feels like a maze sort of. But yeah, there's a bit of a pixelated effect, but it's also slow, and it's pretty obvious how this works. And then there's like a forest-like area afterwards. Something I always like to bring up with this part of the level is how when you're playing it, it's green, but this part of the level isn't green. If you turn the shaders off or look in the editor with shaders disabled, you'll notice that this part is actually red and orange. It's just hue shifted when you're actually playing it, so it appears green. And I guess that might be pretty obvious if you look at your player, because your player is also going to be a different color, but that pretty much remains until the end of the level. The end of the level does actually have 2 secrets, though. The first one is if you go into the coin route, but then jump at the wrong spot, you'll still be able to complete the level, but you won't get the coin. And so there's hidden text that says, "Hey genius, you missed the coin." But you can only get that if you go in the coin route but not get the last coin. The other secret is that there is a 0.01% chance of behind the letters GG you can see the normal face. And actually, when I first uploaded the level, I made a mistake with the random triggers for that, because I accidentally made it so that there's a 0.01% chance of it not showing instead of it showing. So when I verified the level, I noticed, hey, I got that chance, but then I beat the level again, I was like, something tells me something's wrong. And yeah, it was backwards. But now it really is just a 1 in 10,000 chance of it happening. I kind of want to make a sequel to this level, and I think a lot of people would like that. But I don't know, this just feels like one of those levels that feels like it might be better off as a one-off. Stylistically, though, I would definitely take some of the ideas I used in this level and use them again, but, slightly differently. I've done that on multiple occasions, and it gives me a consistent style, and, people liked this level, and if I could do something very similar again, that would be really awesome. And that's not to say I'm just going to do the same thing every time, because we have enough creators like that. But the continued positive reception of this level it makes me want to do something similar. And again, at the same time, it's just so complicated to me because I just made the level. Like, I didn't do anything special. I didn't really have much of a vision when making this. I kind of just put some things down and rolled with it. And liked what I got. I was satisfied with it, at least. And people were beyond satisfied with it. Like, again, it just caught me by surprise. In a good way, of course. Hence why I, have consideration of doing it again. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Once this series is done, I'm definitely going to start working on levels again. I have a level that I have decent progress on, but I haven't touched it in a couple months. Like, I was working on it in April and have hardly worked on it since. But in any event, that is null, a level with non-existent value. Well, people wanted me to make a sequel to Pix, and I didn't want to. And then eventually, I did. I really shouldn't have. Oh boy, this level is certainly... yeah. Out of all of my 2.2 levels so far, this is probably the only one I actively dislike. It was rushed, it's really long, it has a lot of visual bugs, and there's a lot of weird anomalies with this level, and that's probably gonna be the most notable thing to be talking about. But yeah, the level starts out pretty standard. It fits the previous theme of, the green pixel-y style. It also has, arrows moving, but I feel like I made them move a little too much. But this level is so incredibly empty. There are so many parts where there just could have been more, and it just is a weird thing that persists throughout the whole thing. There were some ideas from the first level that I reused, such as the cubes that follow you briefly at 14%. I kind of wish I made them in front of the spikes that are floating instead of behind them, because it just kind of looks weird, especially since the lines, perfectly align, for the lack of better phrasing, and it makes it look really bad. This gameplay was also just not fine-tuned whatsoever. This is janky, awkward gameplay. And throughout the entire level, I just used some really ugly shades of green in some parts, and then there's that monster at 21% who just has white teeth that look completely different from the spike teeth. I don't... What? What even? One of the few interesting parts of the level is at 26%. You might not be able to easily notice it, but there's these little cube guys as decoration in the background, and they have a 2-frame animation. This was kind of supposed to be a reference to games like Street Fighter, where you'll see characters in the background cheering, and their animations are just 2 frames. And I don't know, I just thought that would be an interesting idea, except I didn't really have much to work with. so I kind of just had their facial expressions kind of change because they don't have limbs. And, aforementioned laziness. But I like how that part's like back and forth. And actually, when you teleport after that part, there's a song trigger that's there that is mostly there because when I was working on the level, I kept having sync problems. Because that's the biggest goddamn issue with the sideways and backwards gameplay. It's nice to make until you have to playtest it, and it becomes an absolute nightmare. And that's why not many people fucking do it. It's a neat concept, but in the editor, it's a pain in the ass. Which is also just kind of why it took me so long to make any 2.2 levels. I kept using sideways gameplay, and it became impossible to playtest. But there's pretty uninteresting stuff in this level for a little while. And by a little while, I mean all the way until 55%, where we have this UFO that is way easier than it looks, probably solely due to the indicators. But then after the UFO part, we get a greeting from an old friend. This monster guy is back, and better than ever, because he has actual indicators on his attacks, and his attacks don't look incredibly out of place. This was definitely a better way of doing this boss, and this was supposed to be towards the end of the level. I'll come back to that comment in a moment. But, he's still pretty simple, has a laser shooting from his mouth, and he also has these things shooting from his eyes with these exclamation points as indicators, and those are also based on some random triggers, but it is still kind of awkward. Even then, the boss fight just is so short, he just disappears. I mean, at least, his head detaches instead of just him disappearing. But then you get to 70%, and then at this point of the level, it's just Jesus Christ, how much longer is it? Because it's a 3-minute level. But at that point, I had reached a part of the song where it was I don't know what's a good part of the song to end at. But I also wanted the last part of the song to be in it, and I could have used another song trigger to just make it jump ahead, but I didn't really have a good part to have it smoothly transition from. And so the remainder of the gameplay is pretty uninteresting. Then you get to 84%, and the remainder of the level has some weird visual bugs at some points that I cannot explain. This level actually has a lot of visual bugs. At 92 in the UFO part, you can see that there are some blocks just not there in the filling of the layout, and those are there in the editor. They just don't show up in the actual level, and I genuinely don't know why. That's an issue that I cannot fix, and I've attempted to. Another issue is towards the beginning, that in sync with the music, the camera is supposed to pulse from out and then in twice, but it doesn't. It zooms in instantly, and that's it for that camera part. But if you play the level in the editor, it shows up properly. I don't understand what I did wrong there. Those camera triggers are literally just broken, but not if you're playtesting in the editor. And then probably the hardest one to explain, because I don't know why this happens, is the logo that appears at the end of the level when you beat the level. It only appears if you beat the level on attempt 1. I've never seen anything like that happen before, and I don't know how that happens. That's why in the compilation footage, I'm no-clipping the level. It says ignore damage in the corner. I wanted the logo to appear, but unlike most of the other levels, where I just had cuts in the footage, I couldn't do that here because then the logo wouldn't show. And the logo's supposed to show for the proper experience of the level. But you can't have a proper experience with the level unless you beat it first attempt in a run. Which most people probably aren't gonna do. I doubt anyone's beaten this level. I doubt anyone has any interest in beating the level. Nobody really talks about this level because it was so rushed and so bad. You don't need to say it. Nobody needs to say it, because I've already said what there is to say. And I've said things that people probably didn't even know about, all the weird visual errors that I just simply can't fix. Again, it's not like I haven't tried. I have tried. And they just don't get fixed. What is this game's programming, dude? Listen, People wanted a sequel to Pix. When I actually decided, you know what, I'll make a sequel. This is not what they had in mind. This is not what I had in mind. This level would probably be better off not existing, but by the time I was like, geez, I need to, like, rush the hell out of this level, I was so far in. I wasn't gonna scrap a level that was basically complete. I just didn't feel right doing that. But I simply wasn't satisfied with what I had. I genuinely didn't know what to do. I wanted the level to be out soon at the time. And I guess I kind of just went with the bare minimum. What else was there to do? Everything I tried with this level just looked off or bad. Like, this level was just not fixable. It's incredibly just... It's just... I really don't know what there is to say. This level is so buggy in ways that I couldn't fix. I don't know how to fix them. But, this is what we got instead. It's there if you want to play it. I wouldn't advise it, but, like, if you want to, be my guest. I'm not going to stop you. Nobody is, unless the servers are down. There's really not much else to say about Super Pix. It really just happened, and probably shouldn't have, I guess. The last level we will be talking about in this video is Distorted Inferno. This is my most object-heavy level. It has a ton of effects, and there were a lot of things I had in my vision for the level, and I ended up really liking how it turned out. But that kind of required me to have 98,000 objects and over 1,200 groups. But yeah, this level is very fiery and, for the lack of a better term, mindfucky. And that was the point. This was supposed to be a very, like, disorienting experience, but obviously I didn't want to make the level unfun. I still, tried with the gameplay. It ends up being close to, like, easy demon difficulty, but I wanted it to be, like, 9-star difficulty. But I think the level is a bit too long for it to, really justify that sort of difficulty. Now, this level is criticized often for having a lot of effects. And I find that really ironic because that was the point. What did you expect when entering a level called Distorted Inferno, which literally has an ominous description and had ominous teasers on purpose? Hell, even one of the sneak peeks I made for the level showed a bunch of the effects before I made, like, almost any of the decoration. I mean, this level is basically hell, and that was kind of intended. I mean, I wouldn't even say kind of, I'm seriously downplaying it. It's very orange and fiery, not entirely orange, like even the first ball is mostly purple. But yeah, there's a lot going on in this level, but I wouldn't say it's over-decorated or anything, at least not in my opinion. I mean, you have the right to have your own opinion if you do find it to be over-decorated. But there's still a lot to say about this level, so let's just start from the beginning. This cube part is relatively standard, and basically shows everything you need to know about what you're about to experience. There's fire, there's smoke, there's also a trigger for a photosensitive mode, which a lot of people say that's the only way to play the level, but, like, no, it's for people who are photosensitive. But it's still pretty mindfucky if you use it, just not to the same degree. God forbid I'm considerate. There's also a bunch of arrows that are pointing the opposite direction. There are hands and monsters falling. There's also a monster sleeping in the coin route, which is kind of cute. There's also a lot of text in the first half of the level. Like, even right at the ship transition, there's text that says, "Turn back now." And that ship part has a lot of angry faces, more smoke, there's, like, pulsing glow on the top and bottom. Also, one of the faces, specifically one at 12%, has a 5% chance to be Sans. The swing part right afterwards is probably one of my favorite parts, despite how simple it is, but it has, like, pixelated fire and, yeah, pretty straightforward gameplay, especially for a swing part. At the ball part, I also really like the grid effect I sort of did, where the blocks are kind of moving back and forth, but it also kind of looks like they're moving like forward or backward or something. And I don't really know how to explain the effect, but really they are just moving like forward and backwards. Text in the transition out of that ball part is interesting because there's a 50-50 chance of it saying get out, and the other 50% says no mercy, which, like, I don't know, I thought that was kind of neat to have the text be different. Then at the following part, there's like falling black pixels in the sky, falling downwards, I guess. As well as a lava pool where, you know, there's a couple of like clearly distressed faces. But also the lava's pretty well decorated and like detailed, I would say. There's also binary code text there, which I don't remember what that says, but I'm pretty sure it says die. I could be mistaken. While editing the video, I'm going to show the corrected translation. Then right before the drop transition, there's text that's actually kind of, you know, hard to see because it's a little out of the way. It says, I tried to warn you. That was one of the things I added way later when working on the level, because I didn't realize that was kind of redundant, where right at the drop there's text that says you were warned. And there's like these hands trying to grab you, and then there's a cube with player colors with like X's for eyes. There's lightning that appears. The spider part's like kind of shaky, has, you know, a lot of the like fiery effects and whatnot. A lot of like orange glowing pulse stuff. Smoke, of course. Then there's this wave part, which if you've seen the sneak peeks for this level when I was still working on it, one of the sneak peeks actually shows that this wave part used to have a coin route, but I decided to remove it because I thought it was too difficult compared to, like, you know, the level's intended difficulty. But yeah, I like how throughout, like, even like the spider part, even though the level's mostly orange, there's other colors pulsing, and like there's a, you know, an area trigger that makes at the wave part, it's like yellow instead of purple. The part afterwards even has, like, if you look closely, there's like arrows in the background that kind of pulse at times, some facing upwards, some facing downwards, which again adds to the disorientingness of the level. There's like, you know, electric flaming purplish stuff. I don't really know what to call that stuff, honestly, but yeah. Then there's a jump at 48%, and because there's like a shockwave effect appearing, or whatever it's called, the spikes there can be kind of hard to see, so I actually added an invisible pink pad there to kind of do the jump for you. But it is still very much possible and easy to, you know, do the jump without that. Chances are you might not even notice. And then one of my favorite things in the level is at 54%, I added like a cutscene thing where things are kind of just falling apart as you're, you know, not even on screen. And things are shaking in tune with the music and whatnot. And I really love how that turned out. That like perfectly matches the vision I had. And like even the colors are like kind of green for a second, which wasn't intended. And even the part right before that, only some of the arrows are moving, which is interesting. Then you enter a 4x speed ship part, which the blurriness of it actually makes the spikes really hard to see, but I imagine as you're playing it, you know they're there. Fortunately, with the ball part afterwards, the blurriness isn't as bad, so the spikes are a bit easier to see. And also, like, the purple blocks that are rotating in the background, the animation is kind of staying the same for those, like, as it's, you know, repeating itself. But I had it intentionally, like, not scale all the way back down, so it just keeps getting larger, and it just makes it look different each time that it's, like, repeating the animation, so it doesn't look like it's repeating, but it is. Then there's this part that, you know, is a pretty easy cube part, but there's a lot of text that's trying to distract you. And then the gameplay slows down, goes to, like, double speed, and there's also, like, a time warp trigger there at the auto part. And then there's that eye that's watching you, and I actually originally intended for there to be multiple of those where they just kept appearing in different spots watching you. And it's supposed to be really creepy. Again, that was, you know, sort of the whole theme with this. But I also really like the static effect that I have on those blocks, where there's basically just a shit ton of pulse triggers for those, making all those different tiles turn gray and black. But, like, each of those tiles, they're not all individual groups, but there are, like, 20 of those groups, and some are in a couple of groups. Some are, like, a lot of them will be doing the same thing at the same time. But it all happens so quickly to where you're really not even noticing it. Some tiles I've also noticed don't do anything for some reason, and I'm not really sure why that is. Then, of course, the colorful block above the static ones is a reference to that colorful structure that appears on, like, no-signal TV channels, which apparently is called SMPTE color bars. Yeah, let's just roll with that, sure, why not? But then, around this part, some of the effects are supposed to show more, like, disorienting. And I don't know if that's necessarily done properly, but my other part of the intention with this part of the level specifically is the level looks like it's supposed to be kind of like breaking. That's why some of the colors like get really weird and kind of washed out, and the camera keeps moving in ways to where you can't even really see what's going on. And then like even right before the wave part, there's these squares that appear that say missing texture, and the black and pink color scheme for that's an obvious reference to Gary's mod. Or I guess a lot of games for that matter, because I got a very similar bug in Geometry Dash once. I was messing around with some textures and, well, this happened. Anyway, that wave part, the camera keeps rotating in weird ways. And the rest of the level, the colors are constantly changing, things are falling. And, like, the intensity of the music kind of just adds to the whole thing. And, like, this last part of the level isn't actually particularly too difficult if you're just focused on the gameplay. That last coin is also super fucking easy. You just click when you go into the swing transition. But yeah, the idea here was that the level was kind of breaking. There's, a couple more arrows facing backwards and a bunch of X's appearing everywhere, kind of to distract you. And things are pretty zoomed in with a lens effect showing, kind of just blocking the majority of your vision. And then the last cube part, there's like these hands trying to grab you, some of which you can't really see that well. But that last part is pretty easy. You get in that dash orb and like there's spikes at the top and bottom that are trying to close in and looks like you're gonna die, and then that's where the level ends. I think I did that part really well with the music. There are a lot of things in this level that I feel like I did really well in relation to the music sync and whatnot, and I just love that. I absolutely love it. Even when the logo starts appearing, it's like flickering, and the sync for that isn't great. I still believe I had the right idea going for it there. And, the end screen appears with the logo, which has like 8,000 or so objects. It basically appears how I had hoped, where it's mostly orange and white outlines, but then there's a bunch of green, blue, and red surrounding it that's all like kind of just messy, and the letters are all messy and whatnot, and that was the intent, of course. But yeah, this level was intended to just be one giant mindfuck, and I like to believe that's kind of what ended up happening. This is a level where I had a very specific vision for, and I think I executed that vision the way I had hoped to. However, there is also an old version of this level that still exists in my saved levels. The gameplay was complete, but I didn't do much of the decoration. But I decided to restart the level from scratch because that version of the level had really unfun gameplay. It had like a trillion time warp triggers, which just made some of the gameplay too fast, oftentimes. Too unpredictable, oftentimes even kind of deceptive. And there was some decoration and like ideas that I didn't end up reusing in the final version, but really the only one that comes to the top of my head is like monsters chasing you at one part towards the end, which I kind of copied that from Viking Arena from Meltdown. And I don't think it's a bad idea, but I think I actually just didn't reuse that, but by accident. But I don't really mind that I didn't end up using that. The gameplay of the old version is not very good. It's incredibly unbalanced and just looks just straight up unfun. But I'll probably show that in like a future video or something. But yeah, like I said earlier, this level has 1,200 groups. And you can blame the advanced random triggers for that. Whenever I have to use advanced random triggers, it oftentimes just requires me to use a lot of groups, which I mentioned earlier, because a good example of this is the static blocks. Those, the different groups for the different tiles They all have like advanced random triggers with them. Those are associated with different pulse triggers, and those pulse triggers are associated with those tiles. And just a lot of the weird effects that I did in this level, plus the shaders. I know I said before I would go in detail with some effects in some of my newer levels, but I'm just terrible at explaining shit. But yeah, this is probably one of my favorite creations because it just matches my vision really well. Reception on it is relatively mixed, but I can see why people wouldn't really like the use of shaders and like the mind fuckiness. And while that was the point, yeah, I can understand it. And so that was part 5 of this series. We only have 7 more levels to go, which will obviously be in part 6. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you then.